Have you ever been zapped by a proton beam? I have. It is not as common as being struck by lightning, but it does happen. For instance, if you undergo cancer treatment using proton therapy, which is becoming increasingly common, then you have probably had a few proton beam sessions under your belt. Yeah, you are basically a superhero now. But what if you are unfortunate enough to be zapped by a proton beam in outer space, say, while walking on the surface of Mars or something? You may have noticed the scene from the first Avengers movie where Iron Man is hit by a proton beam weapon on an alien planet. And when this happens to him, we hear a sound effect that's supposed to convey the intensity of the attack. But this sound is usually just some dramatic music, sting, or a zap sound effect. There is no real way to know what it would actually sound like because we've never heard the sound of a proton beam before, right? Well, actually that is not true. Now, thanks to a new paper published in the journal Apple, we have our first ever recording of a proton beam. And it turns out that proton beams do not just look cool, they can also tell us how to make stars. Okay, so let's start by saying that proton beams are not the same thing as regular beams of light. They are made up of positively charged particles called protons that are accelerated to half the speed of light and then focused into a narrow beam by magnetic fields. Because these particles are charged and moving really fast, they interact with matter in unique ways. For example, when a proton beam hits something, it doesn't just pass straight through like a ray of light. Instead, the protons knock electrons off of atoms in the material, and those electrons spiral around the protons, creating a sort of miniature sun. These beams of particles are used in medicine to treat cancer because they deposit their energy very efficiently into the tumor, minimizing damage to healthy tissue. But proton beams are also being investigated for other applications, like sterilizing spacecraft before they launch so that any bacteria on board won't contaminate whatever planet they land on. And scientists are even exploring whether proton beams could one day be used to generate power in space. All of these things are possible because we humans have figured out how to create and control proton beams here on Earth, but we are still working on sending them farther than just a few feet away. That is why the Avengers trip to the planet Morag in the Avengers was a little unrealistic, since it would be pretty difficult to pull off such a long-range attack. Plus, the planet's atmosphere would probably get in the way. And who knows what weird stuff is floating around in that alien atmosphere that could mess with the beam. But let's say you are on solid ground, like standing toe-to-toe with an alien on the surface of Mars, which has an atmosphere but not much of one. Would you survive a blast from the enemy's proton beam weapon? To answer that question, researchers from the University of Chicago and NASA created a small-scale simulation of what a proton beam might look like on Mars. They sent a beam of protons through a tube filled with a thin layer of simulated Martian atmosphere. Then they put a microphone at the end of the tube to pick up the sound created by the beam as it interacted with the simulated atmosphere. The results varied depending on the energy of the beam. At lower energies, the sound was pretty quiet. But at higher energies, it started to get louder, and the researchers were able to identify the key frequencies produced by the beam. Now they want to create an app that simulates these sounds at different energies so that we can better understand what we would actually hear if we were ever attacked by a proton beam. This research not only helps us understand the sounds of science fiction, it can also help us understand the universe around us. Stars produce energy by fusing hydrogen into helium. And if we want to recreate this process here on Earth, we need to figure out how to get hydrogen nuclei close enough together to start the fusion process. One promising method involves using powerful lasers to heat and compress hydrogen gas, but there has been a mystery surrounding this technique for decades. Scientists have not been able to observe the conditions inside these hydrogen bombs because, well, they explode. So we haven't been able to figure out exactly what's going wrong. But in 2021, a team of researchers at the University of Rochester used a proton beam to create the first synthetic diamond that accurately models the extreme conditions inside stars. The beam heated a tiny sample of hydrogen gas to 500,000 kelvins and compressed it to 10 million times the pressure found in the Earth's core. This helped researchers understand how diamonds form deep inside the Earth and how to make them bigger. But it also gave them insight into what is happening in hydrogen bombs. By studying this synthetic diamond, they learned that an important part of the fusion process is a chemical reaction between hydrogen and carbon. If they can control this reaction, they may be able to make stars shine more efficiently, which would be really helpful for our little corner of the universe, Proton beams are clearly a major scientific advancement with lots of exciting applications. So, remember all those times you thought you got zapped by a proton beam? Yeah, me neither. Well, now you know that you probably didn't. And if you did, you survived unscathed. You're welcome. If you like our videos, please like and subscribe. It helps us grow our channel.